Seeing that here, and of course when taking a look at Guillermo Castilla's team, who we did get to feature on stream yesterday, we've got the Lunala as well as that Groudon, so that's another kind of interesting diversion when it comes to those restricted pairs.
The Lunala's popped up a lot more than I was expecting, actually. I wasn't expecting it to be this prominent. I was expecting it to turn up and I was expecting people to play it, but I don't think I ever banked on it turning up in this high account, particularly at the top tables as well. And not saying it's a Pokemon that people should end up at the lower tables with, but what I'm saying is it just took me by surprise. And I think being able to definitely take an attack as well due to the ability in Shadow Shield is so helpful and cannot be underestimated. So you've always got to be conscious of that. But outside of the teams, you know, share some similarities but some differences. I like that they've actually both gone with a different grass type. They've both got very different supporting casts, something like the Grimmsnarl for Markus and then a Tapu Fini over for Guillermo. Very different when they come to their choice of electric types, right? Markus is much more offensive in the Regieleki, but Guillermo's got that Thunderous, which yes can be very offensive, but kind of requires a little bit of setup to get it there.
Well, we're going to go ahead and kick off this game number 1 of Swiss Round 12 between Markus and Guillermo. Markus leading with that Incineroar and that Regieleki, and Guillermo bringing the Groudon and the Venusaur.
It's a combo that we haven't seen a whole lot. Groudon Venusaur is so clear why it works. There's no doubt in anyone's mind why these are a power pairing, and honestly, something I expected to see a little bit more. Now, this gets really tough, I'd say, for the player staring it down, because you've got to be so careful that this Venusaur doesn't just get to completely run away with the game thanks to its chlorophyll ability. You need to find a way to potentially change that weather or slow down that Venusaur, but Markus doesn't have a way to immediately change the weather, so we are going to be playing in the harsh sunlight for the duration of the game, and that limits his options and maybe forces his hand a little bit when it comes to what he Dynamaxes, what he targets, because this Regieleki, yes, a good Dynamax, but I don't know if it's the perfect time that you want it Dynamaxed. Maybe it's just getting Dynamaxed to deal with the Venusaur.
I mean, Dynamax Regieleki can be an absolute powerhouse here, and especially when Incineroar is just going to go for the fake out onto the Venusaur, you at least buy yourself one turn to be able to deal with this Venusaur, and a quick Max Strike as well coming up from the Regieleki to start controlling those speeds, because you're right, Markus doesn't have a great way to control the weather, but you can drop that Venusaur speed with those Max Strikes, and also maybe just avoid a Precipice Blades here.
Markus getting away with it that time, you know, no real way to stop the Groudon from firing off that Precipice Blades, but not hitting the Regieleki, an absolute huge problem for Guillermo here. I think really wanted to land that, just deal with the Incineroar. The Groudon was left alone. That was quite audacious by Markus to not actually target it with the fake out, especially because it would get to answer with the Precipice Blades. So really tough turn there, I think, for Guillermo. Got really nothing done after that Precipice Blades miss, and now this Venusaur is forced out. It's so low, it's not worth Dynamaxing anymore.
No, and that was actually a really nice call from Markus as well, because in that scenario, maybe you just expected the Venusaur is going to go for that Gigantamax right away when you have the weather on your side. But the Max Lightning now coming out from Markus right into the Incineroar. It's just going to be a one-hit knockout here. And that's huge, because you also get the terrain control, and so regardless of whether that Venusaur is going to stay in its normal form, it cannot go for a fast sleep powder anymore.
This Regieleki is just kind of running away with the game. That is the speed control that is just not needed, right? It's just so fast, it doesn't need any help. Yes, a little bit of Max Strike is fine, just to make sure that you're moving first, but honestly, I think, you know, you've got to be careful as to what is happening to this, you know, Regieleki. Are you going to be able to hit it with the Precipice Blades? Because if you don't hit it this time, you're definitely in trouble. Of course, the change of terrain there does take away immediately. And that Regieleki, though, if it had taken a previous Precipice Blades, would be knocked out. But right now, the Regieleki is just picking off Groudon's partners, and Markus is just nicely supporting it with things that deal with Groudon really well.
I mean, if you have a Rillaboom in the back, I think you're pretty satisfied and comfortable just kind of leaving the Groudon to its own devices until you feel like you are able to get a good knockout onto it. But Guillermo is going to switch back in that Venusaur that is sitting at a precariously low amount of HP. There's still 3 more turns of sunlight, though. There's
a whole lot more sun to get through, and there's no way to change it. So Guillermo can take advantage of that. My biggest concern is that even with Chlorophyll, Venusaur's not catching up with that Regieleki, and it's gonna struggle, especially if it gets caught by another Max Strike. It's just 100% doomed. I mean, the Groudon could get caught by the Max Strike if the Venusaur tries to protect and play smart about it. Also, there's just straight up priority available from the Rillaboom. The Rillaboom is just able to start picking things off, and yes, I know Grassy Glide into a Grass type isn't the most effective move, but it still does a whole lot of damage, and, you know, it's got the control of the terrain. That Grassy Glide could just be enough to maybe pick out this Venusaur. Guillermo, though, knows he needs to keep the Venusaur around, and one of the only ways to do it is going to be to Dynamax it, even though it's very low on health.
Maybe you are going to be able to read a big turn here. Maybe with the Max Strike going into the Lunala, you do buy yourself some time, but yeah, just a big Max Guard here. This might have paid off here for Guillermo.
Might do, and if he can target into something like that Rillaboom and get big damage down, that would probably be absolutely fine. The Woodhammer, though, the Venusaur just getting felled by the Rillaboom. I love that Markus calls this and just targets down the non-obvious choice. Yes, the Lunala gets in for free, essentially, but I still think that you just took away Guillermo's Dynamax without anything coming out from it. You're probably feeling pretty good about your board position in this game.
I mean, that could have been a very different story if that was a read into Markus going for a Grassy Glide there, but that was a phenomenal call. And the Max Guard to be able to soak up the Max Quake coming out from the Venusaur, and then just the Woodhammer to be able to polish off the rest of that damage. Now Guillermo is down to his final 2 Pokemon in that Lunala and that Groudon, and most importantly, without that Dynamax.
Yeah, no Dynamax for either trainer, but Markus got so much done with his that it's definitely put him not only in a Pokemon advantage, but just an entire board advantage. This Rillaboom back in against the Groudon, probably feeling pretty good about its chances. And yeah, the Regieleki's not Dynamax anymore, but it can now just start working on this Lunala for a little bit, at least softening it up for something in the back. The Lunala, though, does get a fire back with the Moongeist Beam, and that should start dealing some really big damage and just taking knockouts here.
Gonna knock out Markus's Regieleki, but at this point I think Regieleki has done everything that it's needed to do, and a Woodhammer follow-up from the Rillaboom will one-hit knock out the Groudon, and now Guillermo is left with a Lunala that also has had its Shadow Shield broken.
Shadow Shield's broken. Yes, it could try and work on a bunch of recovery, but at the end of the day, I mean, Markus may not even have to reveal his 4th Pokemon here. Could just bring in that Incineroar and tidy up the game that way. He is going to reveal it, though. He is going to reveal the Zacian and just let people know that he did bring a restricted, confirming that one. I'd be shocked if he didn't, looking at the other available Pokemon. But that is at least a little bit of information that Guillermo can take into game number 2 and say, okay, well, I now have to prep not for the Yveltal, but you know, the Zacian instead is the big choice. And I think he did that quite well in his team selection. Does decide to throw in the towel in this one, though. So game 1 going over to Markus Stadter.
Markus positioned with that Regieleki super well, and just being able to call those first couple of turns correctly really swung the momentum in his favor. The fact that Guillermo's Venusaur did not go for the Gigantamax right away, maybe trying to call something like a potential Sleep Powder coming through, and identifying that as being the best wave for Guillermo to carve out an advantage in that first game was absolutely huge. Just fake out Max Strike, drop the speed, and then you're able to fire back with a huge Max Lightning just in case the Venusaur stays in.
I think the Venusaur has to Dynamax on turn 1 there. Letting yourself get faked out like that, taking all that damage just isn't good value. And then looking at the team choice, it felt like Guillermo was just so focused on Dynamaxing that Venusaur. He even Dynamaxed it at a time where it just wasn't worth it, essentially, and was able to get picked off afterwards. So maybe needs to look at adjusting that strategy a little bit and breaking free of what may be an expected play for him. Yes, G-Max Vine Lash is absolutely essential as getting damage down between turns and just causing so many problems, but I think after what happened in game number 1, you've got to look at Dynamaxing something else. Or you know, make sure the Venusaur Dynamax is early and can take those hits a little bit better. Maybe it can weave in some attacks of its own as well, because it really got nothing done.
I don't hate going for a Groudon Dynamax here.
Well, especially after Regieleki decided to just run through the game. That's the problem. You need something like that. And Max Quake obviously would be a fine choice from any Pokemon, really, into the Regieleki. I wouldn't really want to rely so much on the Precipice Blades after what happened to Guillermo in game number 1. There is, of course, something to be said about that and how that turned the game even further in Markus's favor. Missing that Precipice Blades, absolutely brutal. But if he Dynamaxes the Groudon and Max Quakes, there's no concern about that. And then he starts getting special defense boosts, which could definitely help out. It just feels like that was a little bit more safe than no Dynamax turn 1 while Markus just throws it up on his Regieleki. So that's probably the adaptation you need to make, is looking at something. If Markus is going to Dynamax that early, you just need to make sure you can knock it out in retaliation. If you go with the Max Quake nice and early on, you get the knockout nice and early as well, then you're in the advantage, and you've wasted Markus's Dynamax super fast.
Well, there is going to be a change-up here as we head into this game number 2, an adjustment from Markus to bring in the Yveltal this time, which was a Pokemon that he left at home for that game number 1. But Guillermo sticking to the same 2 leads as game number 1 with that Venusaur and that Groudon.
Yep, and this is probably a little bit better actually for the Venusaur, because there's no threat of the fake out, and that was just such a problem. The Venusaur taking damage immediately after getting faked out caused the problem. So maybe Markus finding another path to play here. But I like that we're seeing, yep, early Dynamaxes. I think this is what we need to see out of particularly Guillermo, and that Venusaur Dynamax turn 1. It's just a lot safer, you know, even without the threat of fake out, even with the threat of fake out. It just makes more sense. Set up that G-Max Vine Lash, let the damage go down, and go from there.
There's a Dynamax in response from Markus, but there's 2 pretty good candidates here. I mean, the Regieleki did so much work in that game number 1, but it is the Yveltal this time around, and I love that, with the access to Max Airstream to be able to start working on the speed in a different direction rather than with the max strikes. I think that could be a really, really big game changer here, as Regieleki just going to protect.
Yep, Regieleki playing it super safe. Maybe waiting for these max airstreams to come through. Max Quake, though, doesn't care about the protect, so we'll still get a lot of damage done. I mean, that's confirmation that if even the Venusaur hits the Max Quake into Regieleki, it still will be getting a knockout as long as it lands. So that's not really, accuracy is not a concern so much with Max Quake. But Yveltal getting to max airstream as well does mean that the speed control is just going to confidently start catching up to sit with Markus. The big question is, can this Groudon start to deal potentially with this Yveltal? And going after it with the E-Crash not working out.
Doesn't work against Dynamax targets. So yeah, that is going to be a bit of a moot turn there for that Groudon. But I think the most important part is that Markus was able to figure out in that first game that, you know, based on how Max Strike worked with that Venusaur under sunny conditions, that Protect and Max Airstream should be plenty for this Regieleki to get something done here.
Oh, the Regieleki can definitely start to work a little bit on this Venusaur, I think. Maybe try and hit it just for an extra chunk of damage to push the Yveltal into an easier knockout range. Of course, there is limited options on a Regioleki's moveset. And I don't think any of them are particularly helpful when it comes to dealing with a Groudon. So a pivot away from the Regieleki, I quite like that. I'm not upset by that at all. I think it's not going to get enough done to justify its position. But Venusaur's still the fastest thing on the field, so just going to land a G-Max Vine Lash. That's going to start to add up, and I think that could be really important. That was what I think this team was really missing in game number 1.
I mean, that was still a pretty big turn, though, for Markus. You're getting a chance to use that Zacian as a bit of a buffer. Also, that was some
just above half health, and the Yveltal about the same actually when it comes to its total bar available. But the Venusaur and Groudon are also quite heavily damaged, so it really comes down to the speed control, and Markus has been setting up these max airstreams, probably wants to try and land another max airstream on the Venusaur, and then or another one on the Groudon, and then follow up onto the Venusaur with the the Zacian and land the big blade. Obviously it's Dynamax, it's going to do more damage, and that maybe will just force this Venusaur to be a little bit safe. Not even going for it though. Another Max Airstream. Oh, this one is going into the Venusaur, but the follow-up move from the Zacian is going to be absolutely key here.
That Yveltal also is just going to be so fast. And when you take a look at how a Yveltal is able to get set up for the end game, I think that can be really, really important. But the Behemoth Blade does come out from Markus' Zacian right into the Groudon, hoping that is enough to pick up the knockout, and yes, it is. So that Venusaur is now Gigantamaxed. It's going to go for a Max Flare, which will be in the sun. But that Zacian also did get a pretty big knockout, so I think this is an okay trade.
Yeah, he traded the Zacian for another restricted Pokemon, and I think that's absolutely fine in the grand scheme of the game. The Zacian, though, leaving that Venusaur does mean that it gets responded to. This is going to be the final turn of Dynamax for both of these trainers. They fired it off in turn number 1. So at the end of this, they're down. They're kind of in very similar boats, right? They're down a restricted. They've got the option to switch something in. Both of them making the same choice. The smart choice, bring in your Incineroar. You can just throw out a Fake Out the next turn as Dynamax ends, and then go from there. If that's what the trainer's up to do, you know, it actually works a little bit better for Guillermo because he gets the G-Max Vine Lash damage in the middle of all of that. So a lot to be said for how that can play out. But once this Venusaur is dealt with, then my big question is, how do you answer that known threat of the Regieleki in the back? Because the Venusaur is one of the few things that can actually deal with it, and will you even be able to get that Venusaur in a position to do that? Because, okay, well, Yveltal can just pick you off at any given moment. It's a really tough one. Oh, matching, or mirroring the Fake Out onto the other side.
Yeah, I mean, Markus is just going ahead and get the Fake Out onto Guillermo's Incineroar, and also the Oblivion Wing coming through from the Yveltal will do enough to get the knockout onto the Venusaur. But this is what's really scary about having a Yveltal that is set up with a +3 Max Airstream boost. And also access to Oblivion Wing. You're doing fast Oblivion Wings and able to regain so much of your HP that it's a pretty immovable force. Yeah,
and now the confirmation of Lunala. I'm not shocked to see it. It's the same 4 that he bought in game number 1, and Lunala's not going to appreciate those at all. I mean, the Lunala's going to get confidently and competently outsped by this Yveltal, and it's just going to sit there, drain a bunch of health. Even the Shadow Shield is only going to keep you around for 1 turn, maybe. The opposing Incineroar causing a bit of a problem, and don't forget, Markus, if he needs to, and I don't think he's going to have to, but if he gets in a pinch, he does have Regieleki in the back, which is still going to be the fastest thing on the field. If, say, the Yveltal goes down thanks to its Max Airstream boost, but it's still going to be the fastest thing on the field, and that's just going to be a massive problem. So here we go. We get to see how much damage this does and see how much it can heal. Oh, it goes into the Incineroar. All right, that's not where I was hoping to see it, but okay.
I think that's okay. I think that at this point, you know, you just want to try to buy as much time as possible. Lunala does have access to this Meteor Beam as well as the Power Herb that it is holding in order to charge that move up right away. And oh, but the Avoid, ooh, that's absolutely huge.
That is absolutely painful for Guillermo. He's had a really rough day of it with moves missing. That's 1 in game 1, 1 in game 2. Not landing that is so tough. Not getting that Meteor Beam, especially because that's the turn you used the Power Herb. That is a tough beat for Guillermo. There's no other way to say it, and I think that may just be the wrapped up game, essentially.
At least you get the boost from the Meteor Beam, so you know, Lunala is still sitting at full HP, but the Yveltal is still the fastest thing on the field. Yep. Right next to that Regieleki.
It does need, though, to make sure that it just gets a little bit more healing, because it is dangerously low. Can't just be sat there like taking this. You need to get the healing done, because otherwise you are potentially going to get knocked out, and that would be honestly a big problem for Markus, because that's the main source of damage right now, and this Oblivion Wing is going to just continue firing off first. No worries about that. Yep, the Incineroar doesn't take it that well. But the big thing is, you know, can anything on Guillermo's team fire back? I like this rising voltage. I like that the Incineroar is just being taken down, and that's sort of knowing that, okay, well, this Lunala can't really touch the Yveltal anymore.
Yeah, not really. You can see the Moongeist beam now from the Lunala just trying to go into the Regieleki. At least secures that knockout, but now the Incineroar does get to come back in, and it is a 2v1. Lunala is still sitting at full HP.
Lunala's going to have to put in an absolute shift. It's going to have to find a lot of time to try and get this through. I mean, the Intimidate's not impactful. Doesn't have to worry about, you know, certain moves on the Incineroar side of things. But just doubling into it, I think, could spell a bit of a disaster if you are Guillermo. That Meteor, I don't think we can underplay how big that Meteor Beam miss is. That is so unfortunate, and that just really cost him the game. It's a tough one to take, and I totally understand if he's not super cool with it. Moving over to the foul play now, that's so much damage even with a Shadow Shield.
It is. Lunala can still fire back with a Moongeist Beam. It's really hoping to secure a knockout onto this Yveltal, but it's not really going to matter as Incineroar can follow up with a big Flare Blitz. Lunala is still hanging on, but because that Yveltal is the fastest thing on the field.
Just typing-wise, this is not the matchup for Lunala, really, is it? It's not going to be able to land much with the Moongeist Beams, and yeah, Guillermo just throwing in the towel on that one. He tried, but I think after that Meteor Beam miss, he was never quite going to get back into the game. So